can kickstart. So I think Sophie and I were really honored to have been adjudicating this category and really proud of the finalists here. And towards the end of it, we said we couldn't have planned this any better, that we would end up with I guess a WAML, which is not a manel. And so just really proud to be here with the group from Singapore, from several places, led by Amsterdam, and from India. So we thought a good way to lead into this debate would be, or conversation, would just be to start by hearing a little bit more about what each of you came with towards the competition. And you are all Horizon Shaper finalists. Obviously, we think the most exciting category. And what we wondered is, as you think about the horizon of urban futures, what do you, for each of your projects, feel is kind of the most urgent challenge that your community was facing, and how do your particular projects aim or seek to contribute to that? And in responding to that question, I think we're going to ask, perhaps to start with the project from Ahmednagar. I've been reminded, not Ahmedabad, which is a different place. So Sandhya, perhaps we can invite you to share your project.
Thank you, Geci. Is it working?
It doesn't seem to be on.
Hello, hello.
I think they will do it. Try again.
It says low battery.
Are you on, Sophie?
I'm back on. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. But Sandhya is off.
Can one of them go?
Okay, I just don't know if the slides are queued up, though. I think we are ready to go with the first project.
Can I see see if this...
Maybe we can have some tech assistance on the second mic.
Yeah.
You're waiting for the slides.
Try now.
It's fine. Now? Yeah? Oh, perfect. Okay. I had prepared sort of an introduction for the project, and I was going to just dive in straight away because we have 3 minutes. But this morning, Idoya, Charles, and all the other panelists talked about collective action and the need for collective efforts. So I would like to start with the acknowledgement of the major collective effort that went into this project between, of course, my team at Community Design Agency, but between the community of Sanjay Nagar, which is the name of this particular slum, the city, and several social partners, with the key partner Snehalaya, who are a local NGO, who are doing phenomenal work with women and children in that city. And support from the Government of India and key philanthropy partner Currystone Foundation. The architects, engineers, landscape architects, contractors, construction workers, all of them, right? I think like a lot of the audience members really understand what I'm talking about. And especially when we had to continue construction during the pandemic. June 15th, 3 months into the lockdown, we all showed up there to get it going again because that's the sense of urgency we had to finish this first building. So literally, blood, sweat, and tears were shed in the process of making this building. We have finished one of the 8 buildings of this project. We are not done yet. And I won't go into establishing the need or the metrics or the numbers because I think that sense of urgency has already been established this morning. What we kind of looked at is how do we reframe the housing solution? Because the current approach, whether it is policy making, the financial systems, the design process, the construction process, is all aimed at building houses or homes for individual families. So therefore, the kind of solutions that come out are targeted in terms of the capacities of an individual to be able to rent or buy homes. However, what if our goal was not to build millions of homes across the world, but thousands of communities? I think it immediately changes the kinds of questions you ask. And in our context, working in slum communities in India, we start with recognizing the inherent resilience of marginalized people and investing in communities based on the social capital that they have developed over lifetimes. That is something which again gets completely overlooked. This is social capital that communities build with each other, but the current planning and design for cities, really kind of doesn't address that. And really the goal for us is to establish a benchmark for what it means to build for the economically weaker section. To be designed and built in a way that any of us could live in those homes. Because when you say build for the poor, build for the marginalized, it almost becomes an excuse to build very poorly. And that's a huge challenge. And I must kind of quickly acknowledge my time in Singapore. It was very inspiring to see how they handle public housing there, right? So if they can do it, I think everybody can do it. And finally, to close out, we've used, we're looking at how to build this out into a larger model. We're calling it the Equitable Communities model. What's very interesting in how we have approached this is we used philanthropic capital to unlock the potential for investment in the community. And what this meant was it allowed or opens up sort of opportunities to bring government subsidies in. Going forward, we want to figure out how to bring in climate funds, how to bring in social impact investment funds, in order to address this very, very complicated, complex problem. So we have kind of initiated this program called the Equitable Communities Project, which is really sort of driven by this approach of community-based design, how that impacts the financing, and how we can really work with not just communities, I think, not just in the Indian context, but also looking at it globally. There's sort of major efforts in that direction. So I think I would like to conclude with that and wait to answer questions.
Wonderful, and I think we do have some questions about that, I'm sure. But maybe we want to hear about the second project. And so this is the gendered city one, that's multi-city, actually.
Well, I think growing up as a woman of color, it's always in the back of my head how women navigate cities differently, women and girls. And I mean, 10 years into the profession, I've encountered many feminist geographies, specialities, like the whole area of feminist urbanism. And this is when clicked with me as an urban designer and placemaker to embody gender-sensitive design and how that can be integrated within our profession in practice and in designing cities with this gendered lens. And I mean, how cities were traditionally designed, it inherently enabled a certain body type, what I call the default male, and that was the case actually in all sectors of design, not only city design. And when I realized that I needed to make a change, and this actually started 3 years ago when I started writing the Gender City book, and I said, how cities keep failing women? This simple question that was online and offline questionnaire about the historic marginalization of women and girls communities. It was very intersectional. I would say, I call it testimonies on how gender and race, ethnicity, class, citizenship, many other layers impact how we navigate cities. And when I realized, and it was every day was like, wow, I resonate to many of these answers. I felt as well obliged to make some sort of change from where I stand. And I know that many of these experiences and data shows that more than 90% of women can face harm in public space, and how we can change these narratives. And I call myself a feminist growing up, and I try to embody the ideology of gender equity into urban design, and what does that entail. And well, the Gender City now, as an organization, we work on several, I call it interdisciplinary projects, but when you realize how gender impacts autonomy, economic autonomy, body autonomy of women, girls, so I try to embody this as well with participation, what I call feminist placemaking, and how to like take from these ideologies of gender equity into design. And I mean, we work a lot with data and gathering sex disaggregated data, which is vital. And I mean, there is very much a gap in data and perspective. And I call it, it's not like a conspiracy theory, but these diverse perspectives were overlooked over the years. And the idea is to try to embody as many perspectives as possible when designing cities. And I mean, And this what actually as well initiated, and because this is a very specific niche, so it intersects with mobility, gender-sensitive design, safety and security, having a female sexualized body in spaces, and how is that so much different in many contexts around the world. But we know that no country has reached gender equity. There's still so much pay gap. What we call the urban poor are majorly women. Caring activities for the longest in the planning and transportation, it was leisure activities. 75% of women do the care work, and 80% of the care work is unpaid care work. And this very intersects with, as I mentioned, economy and economic autonomy. And I try to gather in a collective way these like different women and some men working on this, I call it a niche field, to like the whole of the collectiveness. And this was the initiation of the Fem Design Network. It is about like, in the beginning it was like, now we are gathering the Feminist Knowledge Hub. It's a database to gather all of the journals, readings, theses of people doing this kind of work. But it's really, now it's about the value of advocacy and collaboration. And sometimes it's like a collective slap in the face. It's never easy to challenge power dynamics. And I would say we are sometimes naive about it, but I envision a gender equal cities are the norm, and this is how we envision it as well in the gendered city. And we try to navigate this multiple intersectional scenarios of people navigating spaces within the collectiveness and the value of the collectiveness and the Feminist Design Network. And as well as I mentioned, we are educated constantly every day on how it's different for women communities and girls all over the globe. And it's never the same. It's very contextual problems that needs contextual solutions, cultural sensitive design, language sensitive design. So there is a lot of value in the Feminist Design Network to localize on city chapters. We have launched in Berlin, Bogota, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and Kolkata's next, Mexico City's next. And we are educated constantly how it's so different, how these women communities, and even like the workshops that we iterate in different parts of the world, sometimes they are not even feasible in some contexts. For instance, in Kolkata, the women workshop, the feminist workshop, we call it as well the After Dark, because this is a whole research project we have in this gender city, the Women After Dark, the WED, and it's how women navigate cities differently all over the clock, and how this impact, of course, mental health, physical health, and there's the step gap, the line gap. It's like a lot of gaps there. But I mean, it's not even possible to do it in some certain contexts, and we are educated constantly how it is to be a woman targeted in the built environment. And yeah, this is basically, this is the impact we seek to have. It's having gender equal cities a norm, having this sort of conversation everywhere.
Wonderful. And I'm sure everybody in the audience is hoping their city will be on the list soon enough as being gender equitable, because that's something we should all be doing. But I think let's hear about the third project. So from cities that are for communities, cities that are for every gender, let's hear about what Singapore has been doing, also a very exciting project.
All right, thank you. First, thank you so much for shortlisting us to be one of the finalists. With 3 minutes, I'll just quickly share the project we're doing, why, what, and how. So why are we doing this? I mean, statistics have shown, and I think in human history, the aging issue is unprecedented. This is the first time in human history that we're facing the aging issue. And with aging, the incidence of dementia also increases. And with better diagnosis, we are able to diagnose it, and in the past it may be a bit underdiagnosed. So if I can give you just very quick stats, as of 2020, 55 million people have dementia, and that doubles every 10 to 20 years. So by the time we reach 2030, it's 73 million people, and by 2050, that's about 140 million people, the size of Mexico. So you can imagine the issue about that. And what we realized also in the study in Singapore is that, for people aged over 65, 1 in 10 will have dementia. And by the time you hit, 75 years old, 1 in 5. So meaning one of us here at the age of 75 will have dementia. And by 85, 1 in 3. So one of us will have dementia by the age of 85. And so dementia doesn't mean that it is a stage, it is a degenerative process, and it doesn't mean that the moment you have dementia, you have to be institutionalized or your quality of life will be affected. So what we're trying to do is to allow people with dementia to stay in their communities and age in their communities in familiar surroundings to slow down the rate of degeneration and with support from their communities. And what we're trying to do here and why we're doing this project is to continue to give them that sense of independence, of purpose, and the most important thing, dignity. And we all age, and we all need to age with dignity. So what we did in this project is, for the first time, we are trying to bridge the healthcare sector with the design professionals. And very often, the healthcare sector takes care of your illnesses, and the design sectors design and play God. What do you need as a dementia patient? I'm going to design the nursing home for you and all that. But what we're trying to do here is a breakthrough in the process. And there is where I would like to explain how we did this, and this is the how. So we have a 3P framework. The first P, participatory process. The second P, development of principles. And the third P, the development and implementation of actual prototypes and products. So if I could just quickly share about the participatory process, like all of us have done. What this does is that it is intergenerational. It involves the children, the entire community of stakeholders, the service providers, to come together to design for the persons with dementia. And because people with dementia have a bit of difficulty in expressing themselves verbally, we also had to get first-person insights from them through new methodologies that are visual, that are physical, about movement, just to understand what it means and what do they go through every day. The first-person insights, and this is one of the very few things that designers do to extract the design brief to truly design. And for the healthcare professionals, it's also their input on breaking their own mindset about taking care of people with dementia in institutionalized settings into your neighborhood and everyday spaces of the community. So we'll talk more about that later in the next few questions. But also, it is important for us to develop not a checklist of what to do, but a list of principles, because we believe in the importance of local context and contextualizing your solutions to the needs of the people in that community. And I think I spoke to Sophie yesterday that there are actually cultural differences in the way we view dementia and the way people with dementia view themselves, in relation to their society. And the last thing I want to talk about is the prototypes, to show that we have implemented as demonstrations. So the first slide is on the, no more slides, but the demonstrations that it can be done and how it can be done sensitively. The second part is to produce a body of knowledge to add to this discourse. And from there, we produce works like a community handbook on how to engage people with dementia and the community, and also a set of design guidelines for the design professionals. And this will form useful information for capability building as well as a resource so that we can scale up this effort, not just locally, but also to more neighborhoods, one neighborhood at a time. And if I can just end, I came across a proverb, and apparently it originated from Africa, African proverb. It says, it takes a village to raise a child. And that moved me because conversely, for me, it takes a village to take care of the most vulnerable of our society and our seniors. And all of us are going to get there one day. It is an existential journey of all of us. So let's do our best as a village. Thank you.
Sophie, I think we did good.
Is it an African proverb?
Well,
that's what
I'd like to own it, so yes.
Okay.
Sophie, I think we did a good job. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating. I mean, what I wanted to pick up on, I'm going to dig into your projects a little bit more, but what's really interesting actually is some of the commonalities between your projects. So focus on community well-being, the dimension of aging and gender. There's going to be, based on current trends, there will be more older women than older men. The whole caring sort of dynamic around that. So learning a little bit about each of your projects, where do you think the intersections might be? And I don't know, could we have a dementia-friendly gendered city? Could we be focusing on how learning the lessons from the sort of engagement, involvement that you've done in your projects? Where do you think the intersections might be?
So anybody can start. You can
Yeah, Sandhya?
There's a lot of data around how housing impacts health and well-being. And statistically, people who have constantly struggled with homelessness and being unhoused also tend to kind of develop illnesses, and their life expectancy is actually shorter, right? So I see that as new housing developments are being built, we have to account for a lot of the things that we discussed today, with gender representation, with ensuring that aging in place is something that we put in place right now. That kind of collaborative effort is so critical, as opposed to waiting for it to happen later, and then you're trying to sort of, figure out sort of solutions to the problems immediately. So definitely, there's a lot to kind of learn, and in fact, in our community project, especially in these informal settlements, the slum settlements, it's very commonplace to have multi-generational families living together. And it's one of the things that we also have to address is gender issues, because there's a lot of, challenges around sort of violence against women, also children. So it becomes part of our design process to address all of those stakeholders and to be very careful in terms of how we are engaging with each of those groups as well, because, if you have the whole community in, the men are the loudest, within that, upper caste men are the loudest, and, it kind of starts trickling down from there. So we definitely see a lot of these challenges as we are tackling issues around where communities live today and what it means for them to have that sort of 20, 30-year plan. Having said that, it's a bit of a challenge, especially when we're dealing with families and people who are just trying to live day to day. So then whose responsibility it is to help envision what a 20-year or a 30-year plan would look like for their communities. And it's a tough one, and we haven't figured out how to bridge that gap yet, because it's difficult. It's a mindset thing. There is proven scientific data that poverty actually impacts how your brain develops, right? And how they perceive challenges and problems. So it's not just a bunch of professionals and the privileged, who are sitting at this on the stage today. We can come up with a lot of solutions and grand ideas, but how do we ensure that we're creating these pathways where everyone can come along the process? And it's a long process. I don't believe in 5-year plans. So, I'll conclude my comment with that. Yeah.
Nourhan, what about you? And also pick up on, this point around, we're in 2024, and are we only just waking up to the fact that urban planning is gendered? Violence against women, global epidemic. We've seen the Me Too movements, women trying to reclaim the streets. We know that women still bear the major burden of care and so on. So how might you think about sort of integrating some of the things that you've heard here today in that work? And what are the big kind of, why are we in 2024 and only just waking up to this?
I mean, 40 years ago, when Dolores Hayden imagined what is the non-sexist city, and what disappoints me that the change is sometimes a bit slow, and this is what we are trying naively to change in the gender city, is collectively enabling women, communities, and girls to be part of the solution. With mapping and etc. But it's still a very male-dominated urban design and planning and architecture is a bit male-dominated till this moment. 20% only of women are in leadership positions in municipalities or so, and there is a lack of legislation, urban governance that tackles gender-sensitive issues. Gender equity is not a quota in the files. It's not a tick box. It's way more than this, and this is why sometimes the change is not happening as we want it to be. We know that 92% of the Muga prototypes or the pitched playgrounds are male-dominated, and this as well, the disparity with the teen girls and girls playing physical activities in public space and recreational area is lacking in cities, and this is in the UK, let alone some data in different parts of the world. And only 1% of African women has land tenure. So all of the housing issue and actually denying housing for women just because maybe single women or divorced women, this is as well a very issue, like a demanding issue in many parts of the world. So it is housing, it is the urban poor, it's the pay gap, it's the unpaid care work in the economy, and it's all the statistics as well that women will make less steps during the day because of like the frightening of facing harassment or danger in public spaces. And me, myself, I don't go after dark to do physical activity in a park, and the other 85% of women said they will never be in public spaces after dark in some certain areas. I mean, all of this data, but all as well of the data that is yet to be found. It's wowing, as well the data gap and gathering gender-sensitive data is still a long way. And as I mentioned, it's very intersectional. So aging women has very different testimonies, as I say, humanizing data, and this is what you're trying to do, to be educated about the narratives of these women. So it's a very intersectional view on what for the longest has been the norm or the default, and who else and not conforming to what is the default. So it's challenging systems, and this is, I think my next book will be Feminist Systems Change, because I think how the system as well is wired, and even women are in decision tables, as we talked yesterday. We speak the language of men, and maybe the system itself doesn't allow us to even know what is gender-sensitive design or how we can move forward from there. So, of course, representation is so important. Having quotas is so important, but it's only a step in a very, very long stairs in the system to tackle it with a feminist lens or a gender-sensitive lens. So I mean, all the data we have and all the data that's yet to be collected upon how disparities are reinforced on a day-to-day basis because of how things were designed in general and not only cities. And our intersectional view of it, as I mentioned, it means it takes us away from, as well, I have to say, a Western gaze or a white gaze of the issues women and girls, communities face in cities. And this is why me, myself, I'm educated every day of how women and girls can face very different, actually, aspects of danger or hazard, or like how they can navigate cities. And this as well puts a lot of, sometimes I'm very unprivileged. I think like I'm a woman of color, etc. And then knowing and being educated of these different aspects puts me in a very privileged position that I can even speak about these issues. And this is, I think, what we are mostly trying to do, is having this conversation everywhere. So advocating for it and putting the data out there, trying to convince, hopefully, policies and legislation and tackle from the ground up our way to change these narratives.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think there's also something, isn't there, about how do we not build in new aspects of discrimination, and how are we thinking about, I often reflect on a book called Invisible Women, where things like when we're, who is developing algorithms? Well, predominantly it's men, and even when we all use the emojis on our phone, it's changed now, but if you typed in police officer, you would get a picture of a man. If you typed in doctor, you would get a picture of a man. So those things, we need to be really careful, don't we, that we're tackling the issues that exist at the moment, but also thinking, what are these things coming down the line at us? And you spoke really clearly, Elaine, about these issues around dementia coming down the line at us. What is it, 55 million now, and double that number in 10 years, and so on. And I think what's quite interesting about your project is the way that you, I suppose, did with this particular community what we're all talking about doing, that importance of engagement. So tell us just a little bit more about that and what lessons might be learned
on the
from it, on the engagement
aspects. Yeah. So I think when we talk about engagement, I think it's good to have in mind the word a collaborative ecosystem. And I like to think about the people that I've worked with, our team has worked with in Singapore. It's really understanding that it is an ecosystem. It requires everybody to come on board and collaborate together. And what we had to do really was to really bring all the stakeholders and do a mapping of who is where, who does what, who can contribute. And that's an asset mapping. And everybody with an asset, everybody has an asset, and a strength, and of course a weakness. So being in the ecosystem means that you can cover each other's weaknesses, and you can leverage on each other's strength, and even synergize together. So what for me is important when we started the process was to align the values and to get the stakeholders together and say, do we align? Is this what we want to stand for as a society? And the values of a society is a reflection of who we are, and that is so important. And so we have people, not just the persons with dementia, but also their caregivers were very important for us because we engage not just the people with dementia and do jigsaw puzzles with them to understand which are the places that mean the most to them, but also talk to their caregivers because caregiver stress is real. And for that, I like to just point to Nourhan's work that globally more than 80% of caregivers are women, and in Singapore more than 75% of caregivers are women, and that caregiver stress is very real, and that affects the ability for them to care for their charges, the person with dementia. And of course, we brought on board the entire community and stakeholders. So the community are the residents. So in some of our images, you'll see we have connected with over like 200 residents in that community, working to design for the people with dementia based on their brief. Yeah, and also we also brought along the children and the community to do the implementation because it is low cost. Okay, also, so it's not like in Singapore we have tons of money to do everything, but there are pockets where we have to pull in the effort. So in kind, people are able to paint things or donate things or contribute and bring the pot of plant down to create the green effect. Those are the things that the community came together. And we have service providers as well, we have childcare centers, and they did everything they could. And it was a really touching moment because you are educating the people and bringing them along in this certain movement. And saying that, I like to say that very often, and in my society, we do say that, oh, maybe people are a little lukewarm about this, maybe they don't want to do this. And I don't know what was Sandhya's experience in Singapore. I was so glad that she had a stay in Singapore. But it's not that. It's not that people don't want to do things. Sometimes it's that they have an intention to act that is not triggered or catalyzed, and they do not have the knowledge to act, which affects their intention to act. So it's important that in this process we have of engagement, we are educating, we are prodding, we are catalyzing, and we are building capability, not just in the community, but even in the design professionals as well. And the last thing I'd like to share is that what we're doing is not just because we want to do it. We felt like it is bottoms up. But apart from the why I shared earlier, I'm also very grateful that we have a national dementia strategy. But what is important is that a strategy seems very high up there and very lofty. And there may be a certain gap between that and what's happening on the ground. So it's important that in this project and in this process, which I mentioned, the first P, it is to bridge that top-down national strategy with the bottoms-up aspiration and needs. And when you are able to do that, and that's where we come in as the bridge, we are able to facilitate something greater than what it could be on its own. So that is the harnessing of the energy. So I think collaborative ecosystem, participatory process is the way to go. And it's not just for dementia, it is for every aspect of work that we are doing.
I just love that common piece that I think there's a lot of reframing happening here. I think we heard about reframing earlier, sort of a reframing of a particular kind of participation that we used to talk about that can be very superficial and light. And here I think there's a deeper sense of what that means and what models you produce to sustain participation. I think we're also hearing a reframe of inclusion. So it's not, again, just a word that you can tack onto things, but what does it mean deeply to include members of society and community? Because otherwise societies on themselves reproduce themselves. They reproduce their gendered selves, they reproduce their uncaring selves, and that we can do something different. I wonder, Sandhya, if we can come back to you, maybe still on this point about engagement, because you've undertaken a program in, I guess, relative to India's size, a smaller city, but with a huge issue. I mean, the issue of slums, and you've done another reframe there, so from house to community. But given the range of needs and the range of things you could go into, and there's so much one can do in the context of a project, so even in building a community, how did you go about making or guiding choices and priorities to sort of decide what you could actually tackle while keeping the scope as broad as possible?
I'll try to answer that as briefly as possible. So when we go into communities where there is sort of inherent trust built already between the community and sort of the social organization offering services to the community. We ideally don't want to reinvent the wheel, sort of going in there and trying to say that we can do everything. This is very along the lines of being collaborative, right? So the organization in Ahmednagar, Snehalaya, they've been in the community now for 20 years. And sort of having that connection with the community really helped, because the first several months were just went into, do you even want housing? Right? So starting from that point, because we think that they need housing. We think that the community needs 20 toilets. We think the community needs childcare center, but what does the community think? So that was a very emotionally charged, difficult process. And you know, I'm not going to go into the details of how we went about with it, but that was really our starting point. And then when we actually moved into the process of designing, this community is very unique because there are 22 different sort of mini communities within that. In India, it's pretty complex, as everybody knows. So there are different castes, multi-religious community. And we were wondering, okay, now how do we make sure that everybody has a voice? So we started with just decentralizing the power structures, because even within slum communities and marginalized communities, there are inherent power structures. Yeah. And it's a very dangerous place to be in. Because yes, there may be political will to do housing, there may be market forces willing to kind of hedge their bets, but no one wants to deal with this complexity. It's messy, it's dangerous, and how do you go about doing that, right? So we ensured that there was more than 50% participation from women to begin with, and ensured that every community was represented in the conversations. We started with designing the overarching community, which is the opposite of how developers and a lot of other organizations try to sell housing, because you're shown a housing model, and the community says, okay, we want the house or do not want the house. But we said, no, we're going to sit and discuss how we're going to rebuild the whole community. This is not to say, I don't want to paint a romantic picture of this, right? We have faced a lot of challenges. Mm-hmm. Construction costs have gone up by more than 50%. We have had to pivot, re-strategize, but keeping the community going along with us, mm-hmm. When in fact their own earnings and incomes have been hit greatly. And the Indian government, from the time we got independence, have always had housing policies for the entire country, and we're still trying to achieve housing for all. There is good intention, but the implementation is completely lacking, like mm-hmm. what you just described, right? So, and sort of in that sense, you know, the way we have to engage with the community is at every level, where we're keeping them informed about what's happening. And how do you keep them going along the process? Because now it's, you know, in 2019 we started, and we still have a major part of the community to be built. But as a pilot, it's been very successful with the 33 families who are living there, and we're going to break ground on a second building. And what's interesting, and also what is a bit scary, is that our project keeps showing up in a lot of places. And I'm like, wait, there's got to be more models. And that's kind of, you know, terrifying. So, but I think at the same time, having this type of a project as a represented on this global platform, I think it kind of becomes representative of a lot of organizations who are working and coming up with, you know, thousands of different solutions. And you need thousands of different solutions and pathways to achieve, you know, sort of this safe, healthy, and dignified living for everybody. Yeah.
I love that, the diversity of models, actually. We don't just need one. Yeah.
So we're coming towards the end. So you're all horizon shapers. What an absolute powerhouse of brilliant women here. And who wants to join the feminist systems change movement? I'm in for that. Anyone else? Yeah, lovely. Okay, there you are. You can you saw them, Nourhan. You can grab them over lunch and pin them down. Okay, but. Just in a kind of a sentence or two, so you've all made impact in your projects. You're finalists. One of you will win the award. So what next? What are you excited about, and how are you going to scale? Elaine, do you want to go first?
Okay. Well, I think I like really, Sophie, what you mentioned about invisibility. Mm-hmm. And so I think what we're trying to do here is to recognize that in the aged society, it's not just about physical disability at times, right? But it's also about the cognitive impairment that we also need to take care of. And so that is the invisible aspect that we do not see. And so, because of that, we also feel that if it's all in the brain, it's something that you cannot prescribe. And so our 3P framework on process and principles and prototypes and products of education and resource will be able to help everyone around to identify the things they need to do within their own communities and have their own local solutions. And what I hope that can happen is for my little island is to have local solutions, one community at a time until we, have a dementia-friendly neighborhood across the entire island. And hopefully, these local solutions will also lead to global impact because it is definitely transferable, it's universal, and we definitely hope that together we can build a global village to care for our seniors and for humanity to show what it can do in the face of this unprecedented aging crisis.
There you are. So you're speaking to a lot of the right people who can make this happen in their cities. Nourhan, what about you? What are you most excited about and how are you going to scale?
Yeah, and I was reflecting as well earlier about what keeps me as well awake at night, and I constantly the question of how to make this reach the top down, how we can make the systemic change of things. And I mean, this what excites me and as well keeps me very much up and every day trying to reach out for more of the network. What's next? Do the Femme Urban Atlas, a new mapping tool we are about to do, integrate how climate as well. And I always say women and disasters are a feminist issue. And I think what I'm excited about and what as well always makes me anxious is how to make this everywhere in the world the norm. Gender-sensitive design is not a niche word, it's not a buzzword, but it's about dignity for women and girls communities that has been, I would say, normalized for the longest, that you need to be restricted in a way or another just because you're a woman. And why should women live like this? I think normalizing this as well is part of the problem. So driving this change.
Great. We're out of time, so Sandhya, one sentence. What are you excited about?
I'm most excited about, it can't be one sentence, I'm sorry, just give me 30 seconds. I'm currently spending time in Berkeley, in the west coast of the US, and every morning I wake up, and the clean air that I'm able to breathe is just incredible. And I had, it's something that you don't realize when you're living in cities that are so polluted and so not healthy. And I somehow found that my drive to go back and continue to work with the communities is what keeps me going, because as simple as clean air to breathe.
Amazing. Small things, important things, and we're excited you're going back to make this bigger as well. So thank you to all of our wonderful finalists and to Geci for hosting as well.
The Horizon Shapers.
Round of applause.
Thank you.